The person you love is urging you to read this message immediately. Because something huge just happened. My beloved child, don't rush away, pause for just one heartbeat, because something has shifted in a place you cannot yet see. There are moments that arrive without warning, moments so quiet that the world keeps moving as if nothing has changed, while your future silently takes a different direction. This is one of those moments. The person you love has been carrying something inside for longer than you realize, and today, that silence cracked. Not because they planned it. Not because someone forced them. But because life placed them in front of a truth they could no longer ignore. Stay with this message for a little longer, because what happened next is the reason these words found you now. Imagine receiving a message before the sender even presses send. Strange, isn't it? Yet sometimes awareness arrives before events become visible. Today feels exactly like that. Somewhere, a conversation unfolded. A name was spoken. A memory returned. A single decision created a ripple that neither of you expected. It was not dramatic on the outside. There were no flashing signs, no loud announcements. Yet inside that ordinary moment, everything changed. The person you love suddenly realized that time does not wait forever. They understood that every postponed word becomes heavier, every hidden feeling grows louder, and every missed opportunity leaves a question that echoes far into tomorrow. They looked ahead and saw two possible futures, one where silence continued, and another where courage finally stepped forward. That realization shook them more deeply than anyone around them could understand. What if this is the turning point you've unknowingly been walking toward? What if every confusing delay suddenly begins to make sense? Don't answer too quickly. The story is only beginning. Something remarkable happened after that realization. Instead of running from their thoughts as they had done before, they stopped. Completely. They replayed old conversations in their mind. They remembered words they once dismissed, moments they almost forgot, tiny details that suddenly carried enormous meaning. Isn't it fascinating how one new perspective can transform years of memories? The same scenes looked completely different now. The laughter sounded different. The silence felt different. Even the distance between you no longer appeared as an ending, it looked like preparation. They started asking themselves questions they had avoided for far too long. Why did your presence always return to their thoughts during quiet moments? Why did every attempt to move forward somehow circle back to you? Why did ordinary days suddenly feel incomplete without understanding what truly connected the two of you? These questions did not bring fear. They brought clarity. And clarity is powerful because once it arrives, pretending becomes impossible. That is why this message feels urgent. Not because something terrible happened, but because something impossible to ignore finally became visible. Before you move on, hear this carefully: extraordinary changes rarely announce themselves with noise. They begin with one undeniable realization. Today, that realization belongs to the person you love. Tomorrow, its consequences may become impossible for either of you to overlook. Now let me reveal the part that almost no one expects. The huge event wasn't simply what happened around them, it was what awakened within them. There is a profound difference. Circumstances can change in a moment, but awareness changes everything that follows. As the hours passed, they noticed signs where they once saw coincidence. Familiar places reminded them of unfinished conversations. Familiar songs carried unexpected meaning. Familiar dreams suddenly felt less like imagination and more like invitations to understand something greater. It was as though invisible pieces had quietly been arranging themselves long before today, waiting for one final moment to fit together. That final piece arrived, and nothing looked the same afterward. You may wonder why you're hearing this now instead of later. Because timing has its own language. Some messages lose their power if they arrive after the moment has passed. This one belongs to now. Not yesterday. Not tomorrow. Right now. Stay until the final moment, because what comes next reveals what the person you love is preparing to do after everything that unfolded today. Their next choice will not come from confusion. It will come from certainty. And once that certainty begins moving, the path ahead may unfold in ways neither of you imagined. So don't leave just yet, because the next chapter begins exactly where this one ends. The silence did not end when that realization arrived, it grew deeper. Not the kind of silence filled with uncertainty, but the kind that appears when someone is standing at the edge of a life-changing decision. The person you love spent hours pretending everything was normal while their thoughts kept returning to the same question: what happens if I wait any longer? That single question refused to disappear. It followed them through every ordinary moment. They smiled when people were watching, but inside, they were replaying everything that led to this day. Then something unexpected happened. A conversation they almost ignored carried words that sounded strangely familiar. A passing stranger spoke about missed chances. A forgotten photograph appeared when they were looking for something completely different. Even a simple glance at the sky felt like a reminder that nothing stays the same forever. Piece after piece, the invisible puzzle continued assembling itself. They could no longer convince themselves that all these moments meant nothing. Instead, they started seeing a pattern they had overlooked for far too long. What once felt like random events now seemed connected by an invisible thread leading toward one unavoidable truth: you had never truly left their heart, even during the quietest seasons. Stay a little longer, because this is where everything becomes even more surprising. The decision they believed belonged to the future quietly moved into the present. Suddenly, waiting no longer felt safe. Delaying no longer felt comfortable. They realized that life keeps moving whether people speak their truth or not, and that realization carried more weight than anything they had experienced before. It wasn't pressure from anyone else. It was their own heart refusing to stay silent any longer. As evening settled, another unexpected shift unfolded. Instead of searching for answers outside themselves, they began listening to the quiet voice they had ignored for so long. That voice didn't shout. It simply reminded them of every meaningful moment that still carried unfinished meaning. They remembered how certain encounters seemed impossible to explain, how some connections never faded no matter how much time passed, and how every attempt to replace what they truly felt only left an emptiness they couldn't describe. In that moment, they understood something remarkable: the biggest changes often begin before anyone else notices them. Long before words are spoken, long before actions are taken, everything changes inside first. That inner transformation had already begun. They weren't the same person they had been yesterday. Their perspective had shifted. Their priorities had changed. Their fears were becoming smaller than their hopes. And with every passing minute, the courage they once believed they lacked continued growing stronger. If these words are resonating with you, perhaps they arrived exactly when they needed to. Perhaps awareness has its own perfect timing. And if this story has made you pause and reflect, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe if these messages speak to your heart, and pass this message along to someone who might need a little hope today. Sometimes one shared thought creates a ripple that reaches farther than we ever imagine. But don't leave yet, because the most unexpected realization has not been revealed. Then came the moment that changed everything again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was one quiet instant when they stopped asking, "What if I'm too late?" and started asking, "What if this is exactly the right moment?" That single shift transformed fear into determination. For the first time in a long while, the future no longer looked uncertain, it looked full of possibility. They began imagining conversations that once seemed impossible, opportunities they had almost abandoned, and paths they had convinced themselves no longer existed. Every memory that had once carried regret now carried purpose instead. They realized that every delay had taught them something, every obstacle had prepared them, and every unanswered question had quietly guided them toward greater clarity. Before you go, remember this one thought: extraordinary stories rarely announce the chapter where everything changes. They simply continue until one ordinary-looking day suddenly becomes unforgettable. Today may have been that day for the person you love. And what they choose next will not come from impulse, it will come from the certainty that was born the moment something huge happened inside them. The next step they are preparing to take could become the beginning of a chapter neither of you saw coming. And when that chapter opens, you'll understand why every moment leading here mattered. A quiet certainty began replacing every doubt they had carried. It did not happen all at once. It arrived in small waves, each one stronger than the last, until there was no room left for hesitation. The person you love finally understood that the biggest moments in life rarely arrive with dramatic announcements, they arrive disguised as ordinary days that forever divide the past from the future. As they looked back over everything that had happened, they noticed details that had once seemed meaningless. Every unexpected delay had protected them from rushing. Every unanswered question had pushed them toward deeper understanding. Every distance had revealed what truly mattered. It was almost as if life had been patiently arranging invisible pieces, waiting for the exact moment when they would finally fit together. Then an extraordinary thought crossed their mind: what if everything I believed was a setback was actually preparing me for this exact day? That single question changed the way they saw everything. Suddenly, old disappointments no longer felt heavy. They felt necessary. The confusion that once surrounded your connection began fading like morning fog, revealing a path that had always been there beneath the surface. Wait until the final moment, because the next realization became impossible for them to ignore. They recognized that every time they imagined the future, one presence continued appearing no matter how hard they tried to focus on anything else. That realization wasn't created by emotion alone, it came from clarity. And clarity has a remarkable way of dissolving every excuse that once felt convincing. Then something even more remarkable unfolded. Instead of wondering whether they should move forward, they began wondering why they had waited so long. Confidence quietly replaced uncertainty. Possibility replaced fear. The future no longer looked like an unanswered mystery, it looked like an open door waiting to be walked through. Their attention shifted away from everything they couldn't control and toward the one thing they could, the next choice they would make. That choice carried a different kind of energy. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't emotional. It was calm, intentional, and deeply certain. They realized that some messages arrive exactly when they are meant to, not because someone planned them perfectly, but because awareness reaches the heart at precisely the right time. Every ordinary sound around them suddenly seemed quieter than the thoughts inside their mind. Every familiar place carried a new meaning. Every passing hour strengthened the feeling that a new chapter had already begun, even though no one else could see it yet. Stay a little longer, because there is one final truth hidden inside all of this. Sometimes the greatest transformation happens long before anyone notices the first visible sign. By the time the world realizes something has changed, the decision has already been made deep within the heart. That is exactly where the person you love stands now, beyond confusion, beyond hesitation, standing on the edge of a future they never believed they would have the courage to embrace. And now you can understand why this message insisted on reaching you without delay. The huge event was never about noise or spectacle. It was about a moment of awakening powerful enough to reshape everything that follows. The person you love has crossed an invisible line between wondering and knowing. They have discovered that the future is not built by waiting for perfect circumstances, it is built by recognizing the moment that quietly asks for courage. Today became that moment. Every experience that once seemed disconnected has formed one complete picture. Every unanswered question has become part of an answer that is finally beginning to reveal itself. The path ahead may still hold surprises, but it no longer feels uncertain. It feels meaningful. Before this chapter closes, hold on to one final thought. There are rare moments in life when everything appears unchanged on the outside, while an entirely new future has already begun within. Those moments become the stories people remember forever because they mark the instant when possibility became reality. The person you love has reached that instant. Their next step will not be driven by doubt, fear, or hesitation. It will come from a quiet confidence born from everything they have finally understood. And when that step is taken, you'll look back on this message and realize it wasn't simply telling you that something huge had happened. It was preparing you to recognize the beginning of a chapter that had been waiting for the perfect moment to unfold. A new morning arrived, but the person you love no longer saw the world through the same eyes. The questions that had once followed them everywhere had grown strangely quiet, replaced by a calm determination they had never felt before. It was as though an invisible door had opened, revealing possibilities they had overlooked for far too long. Every step they took carried a different energy. Every familiar place reminded them that the future is shaped not by endless waiting, but by the courage to move when the moment finally arrives. Then another unexpected realization surfaced. They understood that the huge event was never meant to remain hidden forever. It would eventually reveal itself through actions, not words. That thought sent a wave of excitement through them unlike anything they had experienced before. They imagined what could happen if they stopped allowing fear to write the next chapter of their story. They pictured conversations that once seemed impossible becoming surprisingly natural. They envisioned old misunderstandings dissolving without struggle, simply because truth has a way of finding its own path. Before you continue, hold on to this thought. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs begin in complete silence, long before the world notices anything has changed. Stay until the very end, because what they decided next became the final piece that transformed uncertainty into purpose. As the day unfolded, they noticed something extraordinary. The signs they had been searching for outside themselves were no longer necessary because the answer had already taken root within. Confidence replaced hesitation. Hope replaced endless overthinking. Every memory that had once carried regret now looked like preparation for this exact season. They smiled for a reason no one else could explain, because they knew something the world had not yet discovered. They knew that change had already begun. And perhaps that is why this message found you today, not to predict the future, but to remind you that remarkable moments often begin quietly before becoming impossible to ignore. If these words have stayed with you and stirred something meaningful inside, consider sharing this journey with someone who might need a little encouragement. Leave your thoughts in the comments so others know they're not alone, and subscribe if stories like this continue to inspire your path. Every shared voice has the power to become hope for someone else. But don't think the story is ending here. The most meaningful chapter is still waiting just ahead, and the next revelation will connect every piece you've heard so far in a way you never expected. Now the final truth of this chapter begins to emerge. The person you love made one promise to themselves, a promise they refused to break. They would no longer let fear decide what tomorrow should look like. They would no longer postpone the words that deserve to be spoken or ignore the opportunities that life quietly placed before them. They realized that destiny is rarely a single dramatic event. More often, it is built through one brave decision followed by another. The huge event that changed everything was not an ending, it was the beginning of a completely new direction. And that direction now carries a quiet certainty that cannot easily be shaken. Before this chapter closes, remember one thing above all else: the moments that transform our lives almost always arrive disguised as ordinary days. Only later do we look back and realize that everything changed in a single heartbeat. The person you love has already crossed that invisible line. Their next move will reflect everything they have discovered, everything they have accepted, and everything they are finally ready to embrace. When the next chapter begins, the reason this message reached you today will become clearer than ever before.